The clinking of crystal champagne glasses stopped dead. 500 of the most dangerous men in New York stared in stunned silence as Gabriele Fontana, the untouchable head of the Cosa Nostra, pulled the curvy, trembling Maid onto his lap. "Meet my wife," he growled, daring anyone to blink. The chandelier hanging in the grand ballroom of the Fontana estate was made of authentic Venetian glass, but to Hortensia Esposito it just looked like 1,000 falling daggers waiting to drop. She kept her eyes lowered, balancing a silver tray of single malt scotch as she navigated through the sea of custom-tailored suits and silk evening gowns. It was the annual Winter Solstice Gala, a gathering of the most ruthless crime syndicates on the eastern seaboard. Tonight, the mansion in the remote hills of the Hudson Valley was a snake pit. Hortensia was not supposed to be here. She was just a maid, working grueling double shifts to chip away at the crushing extortion debt her late father had left behind. Her uniform, a standard black dress with a white apron, was a size too small. It clung tightly to her plus-size figure, accentuating the soft, generous curves she constantly tried to hide. She knew the mobsters and their glamorous escorts looked right through her, or worse, looked at her with blatant disgust. But being invisible had its advantages. Hortensia had a brilliant mind and an iron will. She possessed a photographic memory for faces, allegiances, and whispered threats. She absorbed the secrets of the underworld like a sponge, using the information to carefully map out a survival strategy for her and her younger sister. At the far end of the room, seated on a raised dais, like a dark king holding court, was Gabriele Fontana. Gabriele was the boss of the Fontana Syndicate, a man whose reputation was built on cold calculation and unparalleled violence. He had violently seized control of the New York territories 5 years ago, purging the old guard and establishing a reign of terrifying order. He was a striking man, with sharp aristocratic features, piercing dark eyes, and a broad, muscular frame hidden beneath a bespoke charcoal suit. To the world, he was a sociopath without a heart. But Hortensia felt the heavy, suffocating weight of his gaze following her every time she entered a room. He never spoke to her, never acknowledged her in the hallways, but whenever she was near, the air grew thick with an unspoken, predatory tension. Hortensia approached the high-stakes poker table near the terrace doors, her sensible shoes making no sound on the imported marble floor. As she leaned in to collect empty glasses, she caught the scent of heavy floral perfume and cigarette smoke. Cordelia Vance had arrived. Cordelia was the ruthless heiress to the Vance cartel, a massive narcotics and arms smuggling ring based out of Miami. She was tall, dangerously thin, and possessed the vicious temperament of a starved wolf. Cordelia had come to New York with one objective: to force Gabriele Fontana into a marriage alliance, merging their empires to create an unstoppable monopoly. She wore a backless crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination, her blonde hair sleek and severe. Hortensia kept her head down, but she could hear Cordelia speaking to one of her capos. The heiress was furious. Gabriele had been dodging her advances all evening, refusing to sign over the Brooklyn shipping yards. "Look at this place," Cordelia sneered, her voice carrying over the low hum of the party. "Fontana acts like royalty, but he employs absolute trash." Cordelia abruptly stepped backward, her sharp stiletto heel coming down hard on Hortensia's foot. Searing pain shot up Hortensia's leg, but she bit the inside of her cheek, tasting copper. She did not cry out. She did not drop the silver tray. Instead, Hortensia firmly planted her other foot, shifting her center of gravity to absorb the blow, her hidden resilience kicking in. She had endured far worse from loan sharks in the slums of Queens. "Watch where you are standing, you clumsy cow," Cordelia snapped, turning to glare at Hortensia with undisguised malice. "I apologize, Miss Vance," Hortensia said smoothly, her voice a calm, steady alto that betrayed zero intimidation. She locked eyes with the cartel heiress for just a fraction of a second, refusing to submit to the humiliation. "I will ensure your path is clear." Across the room, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Gabriele Fontana had stopped speaking to his underboss. His dark eyes were fixed on the altercation, tracking the exact moment Cordelia's heel had connected with Hortensia. A muscle feathered along Gabriele's jawline. His obsession with the quiet, curvy maid was his most guarded secret. He loved the soft shape of her body, the defiant tilt of her chin, and the brilliant, calculating way she navigated his dangerous world. He had spent months secretly protecting her, wiping out her father's debt from the ledger, ensuring she was kept safe within the walls of his compound. No one touched what belonged to him. Cordelia, completely oblivious to the death sentence she had just signed for herself, sneered and marched toward the dais, her armed bodyguards falling into step behind her. The ultimate confrontation was brewing, and Hortensia, ignoring the throbbing pain in her foot, quickly moved to the shadows near the main staircase. She needed to be ready to run if bullets started flying. The orchestra playing in the corner of the ballroom slowly faded into an uncomfortable silence. The ambient chatter of the party died down as Cordelia Vance and her men formed a semicircle around Gabriele Fontana. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Every made man in the Fontana syndicate discreetly unbuttoned their suit jackets, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons. Gabriele remained seated in his high-backed leather chair, holding a crystal glass of bourbon. He looked entirely bored, though the darkness in his eyes promised extreme violence. "Gabriele," Cordelia said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "Let us stop playing these childish games. The Commission expects our families to unite. My shipping routes in the Gulf, your distribution network in the Northeast. We announce our engagement tonight, and we take over the entire eastern seaboard. Refuse, and the Vance cartel will consider it an act of war." It was a blatant, public ultimatum, a direct challenge to the authority of the Cosa Nostra boss in his own home. Gabriele took a slow sip of his bourbon. He did not look at Cordelia. Instead, his gaze drifted past the armed cartel men, past the wealthy elites, and locked directly onto Hortensia, who was standing quietly by the velvet-draped walls. "You misunderstand your position, Cordelia," Gabriele said, his voice a low, lethal rumble that sent shivers down the spines of hardened killers. "I do not share power, and I certainly do not share a bed with a woman who lacks basic respect for my household." Cordelia flushed with anger, her perfectly manicured hands curling into fists. "Respect? You run a powerful syndicate, Gabriele, but look at the filth you let wander your halls." She turned and pointed a sharp finger directly at Hortensia. "You let fat, ugly peasants eavesdrop on family business. A real king needs a queen who understands power, not a glorified scrub woman taking up space. If you want to show me respect, have your men drag that maid out back and teach her a lesson for scuffing my shoes. Show me you are a ruthless man, Gabriele." The silence that followed was absolute. Hortensia felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew how the Mafia worked. Life was cheap. A maid was expendable. If Gabriele needed to prove a point to avoid a cartel war, she would be dead in minutes. But Hortensia refused to cower. She lifted her chin, her dark eyes flashing with a fierce, quiet dignity. She looked directly at Gabriele, bracing herself for the order. Gabriele stood up. He was a towering, terrifying figure of absolute authority. He set his glass down on a side table with a sharp click that echoed like a gunshot. The cartel bodyguards tensed. "Come here, Hortensia," Gabriele commanded. Hortensia swallowed hard. Her legs felt like lead, but her immense inner strength pushed her forward. She walked across the polished marble floor, the soft sway of her hips drawing the eyes of every man in the room. She kept her posture straight, stopping a few feet away from the Mafia boss. Gabriele stepped down from the dais. He ignored the cartel guns pointed in his direction. He closed the distance between him and Hortensia in 2 long strides. Before she could process what was happening, Gabriele reached out, his massive hands gripping her waist. His touch was burning hot through the thin fabric of her cheap uniform. With one fluid, powerful motion, Gabriele sat back down in his chair and pulled Hortensia forcefully with him. Hortensia gasped as she landed squarely on his lap. The solid, muscular wall of his chest pressed against her back. One of his large hands flattened possessively over her soft stomach, holding her flush against him, while his other arm wrapped securely around her thick thighs. The sheer intimacy of the gesture was shocking. He was touching her, claiming her, shielding her with his own body in front of the entire criminal underworld. Gabriele buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent deeply before lifting his dark, murderous gaze to Cordelia Vance. "You have just insulted my wife," Gabriele said, his voice devoid of any warmth. The ballroom erupted into gasps and chaotic whispers. Cordelia stumbled backward, her face twisting in shock and humiliation. "Your wife!" Cordelia shrieked, her composed facade completely shattering. "You are lying! She is a maid! She is a nobody!" "You are trying to humiliate me." Gabriele tightened his grip on Hortensia, his thumb tracing the curve of her hip. Hortensia was paralyzed, her mind racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. Wife? They had never even spoken a complete sentence to each other. But as she felt the steady, calm rhythm of his heart beating against her spine, she realized what he was doing. He was building an impenetrable fortress around her. By declaring her his wife, he elevated her from an expendable servant to the untouchable queen of the New York underworld. Anyone who laid a finger on her now would face the full, unholy wrath of the Fontana Syndicate. "She is Hortensia Fontana," Gabriele corrected, his tone leaving no room for debate. "And she is the only woman who will ever rule by my side. You came into my home, threatened my territory, and laid hands on the woman I love." He raised his right hand, a subtle signal to his men. The metallic clicks of 50 assault rifles being cocked off. Safety echoed simultaneously from the shadows of the upper balconies. Red laser sights painted the chests of Cordelia and her cartel enforcers. "The next time you speak to my wife," Gabriele whispered into the deadly silence, "you will be on your knees begging for your life. Now get out of my city before I make you disappear." Hortensia sat frozen on the lap of the most dangerous man in America, her soft hands gripping the sleeves of his expensive suit. She was no longer invisible. She had just been crowned the queen of the Mafia. And as Gabriele pressed a slow, possessive kiss to her bare shoulder, Hortensia realized the real danger had not been Cordelia Vance at all. The real danger was the terrifying, all-consuming obsession in her new husband's eyes. The mass exodus from the Fontana estate was silent and swift. Within 20 minutes, the grand ballroom was completely deserted, save for the cleaning crews who scrubbed the marble floors with nervous efficiency. Gabriele Fontana had not let go of Hortensia Esposito. When the last of the rival bosses had scurried out to their armored town cars, Gabriele simply stood up, hoisted Hortensia into his arms as if she weighed absolutely nothing, and carried her up the sweeping mahogany staircase. Hortensia was too stunned to struggle. She rested her head against his broad chest, listening to the steady, reassuring thump of his heartbeat. He carried her past layers of armed guards, moving deep into the private, restricted wing of the mansion where no servant was ever allowed. He kicked open the double doors of his master suite and stepped inside. The room was a cavernous sanctuary of dark oak, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and heavy velvet drapes. A massive fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the Persian rugs. Gabriele set her down gently on the edge of a king-sized bed, dressed in midnight blue silk. He took a step back, giving her space, but his dark eyes never left her face. He reached up, loosened his silk tie, and unbuttoned the collar of his shirt. "You are trembling," Gabriele said, his voice softer now, stripped of the lethal edge he had weaponized against the cartel heiress. "I think anyone would tremble after being used as a human shield against a drug cartel," Hortensia replied, keeping her voice level. She smoothed down the wrinkled apron of her maid uniform, suddenly acutely aware of how tight the black fabric was across her full chest and thick thighs. She felt completely out of place in this room of immense wealth. "You were never a shield, Hortensia." "You are the fortress," Gabriele corrected quietly. He walked over to a crystal decanter on a heavy mahogany desk and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, bringing one to her. "Drink this. It will settle your nerves." Hortensia accepted the glass, her fingers brushing against his. His skin was scorching hot. She took a small sip, letting the smooth burn of the expensive liquor ground her racing thoughts. "Why did you do that?" she asked, looking up at him. "You provoked a war tonight. You humiliated Cordelia Vance in front of the entire commission. You could have just refused her offer. You did not have to drag me onto your lap and declare me your wife." Gabriele let out a low, rough chuckle. He leaned against the heavy bedpost, crossing his arms over his chest. "I did not lie to them, Hortensia. I merely accelerated the timeline. I have watched you for 6 months. I bought your father's gambling debt from the Lucchese family the moment I realized they were threatening you. I brought you into my home to keep you safe. You think you are invisible when you serve the tables, but I see every breath you take. I see the way you calculate the exits when you enter a room. I see the way you refuse to shrink yourself, even when people look down on you." Hortensia felt a flush heat her cheeks, but she met his intense gaze head-on. "You spied on me. You manipulated my life so I would end up working in your house." "I protected what is mine," Gabriele stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The underworld is a meat grinder. If any of my rivals knew that the ruthless Gabriele Fontana had an obsession with a sweet, curvy maid from Queens, they would have used you to break me. So I kept my distance. But tonight, when that skeletal witch put her hands on you, when she insulted you in my house, my patience evaporated. You are not going back to the servant quarters. You are staying here, with me." Hortensia stood up. She was a foot shorter than him, her soft, plush figure a stark contrast to his hardened, muscular frame. But she carried herself with the commanding presence of a queen. "If I am staying here, Gabriele, I will not be a pet. I will not be a pampered hostage you keep locked in a gilded cage while you fight a war over my head." Gabriele raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine amusement and deep respect lighting up his dark eyes. "Is that so?" "Yes," Hortensia said, her brilliant mind shifting into high gear. "If I am the wife of the boss, then I am your partner, and you are going to need me." Cordelia Vance is impulsive, but her uncle runs the logistics for their cartel. They use the shell companies out of Delaware to launder their cash before it hits the Miami banks. Gabriele froze. The amusement vanished, replaced by sharp, predatory focus. "How do you know about their Delaware shell companies?" "That information is highly classified. Not even my top capos know the exact routing structure of the Vance money." Hortensia took another sip of her drink, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. When you serve drinks at the high-stakes poker tables, men tend to talk. They assume the fat maid pouring their scotch does not understand high-level corporate finance. They are wrong. I memorized their routing numbers, Gabriele. I know the names of the port authorities they bribe in the Gulf. If Cordelia Vance wants a war, we do not need to shoot her soldiers. We just have to freeze her bank accounts and intercept her next shipment. I can map the entire network for you." Gabriele stared at her, utterly captivated. He closed the distance between them, taking the glass from her hand and setting it on the nightstand. He reached out, his large hands cupping her face. He traced the soft, full curve of her cheek, his thumb brushing over her bottom lip. "You are a dangerous woman, Hortensia," he murmured, his voice thick with raw, unfiltered desire. "You possess a mind sharper than a scalpel, and a body that drives me to absolute madness." He leaned down and captured her lips in a deep, consuming kiss. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claim. It was the crushing weight of months of pent-up obsession finally breaking free. Hortensia gasped into his mouth, her hands moving up to grip the lapels of his shirt. She felt the unyielding strength of his chest, the violent power he kept leashed just beneath the surface. He kissed her until she was breathless, his hands sliding down to grip her thick hips, pulling her soft belly flush against his hardened body. He worshipped her curves, treating her soft flesh like the most precious treasure he had ever conquered. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, they were both breathing heavily. "Tomorrow," Gabriele whispered, his dark eyes burning into hers, "we take down the Vance cartel. But tonight, you are going to show me exactly how a queen rules." The retaliation from the Vance cartel came exactly 72 hours later, just as Hortensia had predicted. Cordelia Vance, humiliated and stripped of her power base after Gabriele and Hortensia systematically dismantled her financial network, made a desperate, suicidal play. Under the cover of a torrential midnight thunderstorm, 3 armored utility vehicles breached the outer gates of the Fontana estate. The security alarms blared, a piercing shriek that shattered the quiet of the mansion. Hortensia was in the underground command center with Gabriele when the perimeter was breached. She wore a tailored crimson silk suit, a garment Gabriele had custom made for her. It hugged her generous curves perfectly, radiating authority and deadly elegance. She stood over a sprawling table covered in tactical blueprints of the estate, her mind calculating the cartel's movements with cold precision. They bypassed the front lawn sensors. Gabriele's head of security barked, monitoring the camera feeds. "They are heading straight for the east wing. They want to hit the armory." "No," Hortensia said sharply, her eyes scanning the blueprints. "The armory is a decoy. Cordelia is petty and obsessed with status. She thinks if she destroys the master suite, she destroys our symbol of power. She is taking her men through the servant corridors. She bribed someone on the staff to get the blueprints of the hidden passages. Gabriele turned to her, his assault rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Are you certain, my love?" "I am positive," Hortensia replied, her voice steady. "But those blueprints are 10 years old. They do not show the renovations you made to the wine cellar last winter. The servant corridor in the east wing funnels directly into the old boiler room. It is a dead end with heavy steel-reinforced doors. A dark, lethal smile spread across Gabriele's face. He tapped his earpiece, communicating with his elite strike team. "Reroute all men to the East Wing boiler room. Do not engage until they are completely inside the corridor. We are going to lock them in the box." Hortensia watched the security monitors as the chaotic scene unfolded. Cordelia Vance, drenched in rain and wielding a submachine gun, led a dozen of her heavily armed mercenaries down the narrow, dimly lit servant halls. They moved aggressively, completely unaware they were walking directly into a fatal choke point. Gabriele left the command center, moving with the silent, terrifying grace of an apex predator. He wanted to handle this personally. On the monitors, Hortensia watched as Cordelia and her men reached the heavy steel doors of the boiler room. Cordelia kicked the door, expecting it to give way to the main house. It did not budge. Confusion rippled through the cartel mercenaries. Suddenly, the reinforced security doors at the opposite end of the hallway slammed shut, locking into place with a heavy magnetic thud. The lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging the mercenaries into pitch-black darkness. From her safe vantage point, Hortensia watched the infrared camera feeds. Gabriele and his men appeared on the steel catwalk above the corridor. The trap had been sprung perfectly. Gabriele did not order a massacre. He simply ordered his men to flood the hallway with concentrated tear gas. Panic ensued. The cartel mercenaries dropped their weapons, coughing and clawing at their own throats, blindly crashing into the stone walls. Cordelia collapsed to her knees, dropping her gun, her pristine image completely destroyed by the suffocating gas and the terror of her own failure. When the gas finally cleared, the heavy steel doors opened. Gabriele walked into the corridor, flanked by his men. The cartel mercenaries were zip-tied and dragged away to the holding cells. Cordelia Vance was left kneeling on the cold stone floor, gasping for air, her mascara running down her face in thick, black streaks. Gabriele stood over her, his expression as cold and unforgiving as a glacier. He did not point his weapon at her. She was not worth the bullet. "You came into my home again, Cordelia," Gabriele said, his voice echoing in the damp hallway. "But you did not outsmart me. You were outsmarted by my wife. The woman you called a peasant just dismantled your entire empire without firing a single shot." Cordelia looked up, her eyes wide with horror and realization. She had lost everything because she underestimated the quiet, plus-size maid who served her champagne. "Take her to the airstrip," Gabriele ordered his men, turning his back on the broken heiress. "Put her on a cargo plane to South America. If she ever sets foot in the United States again, kill her." An hour later, the estate was quiet once more. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a crisp, clean night sky. Hortensia stood on the balcony of their master suite, looking out over the sprawling, moonlit grounds of their empire. The heavy burden of her past, the debts, the fear, the constant hiding, had all been washed away. She was no longer a victim. She was the undisputed queen of the Fontana Syndicate. She felt the familiar, scorching heat of Gabriele's chest pressing against her back. His large, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her soft body flush against his. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, pressing a tender, lingering kiss against her pulse point. The cartel is broken, Gabriele murmured against her skin. The commission has pledged absolute loyalty. The city is ours, Hortensia. Hortensia leaned back into his embrace, covering his hands with her own. She felt the heavy gold of the wedding band he had placed on her finger just 2 days prior. She turned her head, capturing his lips in a slow, passionate kiss that tasted of power, devotion, and undeniable love. No, Gabriele, Hortensia corrected him, softly, a brilliant, confident smile lighting up her face. The city is mine. You just get to live in it. Gabriele let out a rich, booming laugh that echoed into the night, tightening his grip on the beautiful, brilliant, and deeply resilient woman who had stolen his cold Mafia heart. Did you love the intense, gripping journey of Hortensia and Gabriele as they conquered the criminal underworld together? If this thrilling mix of dark romance, high-stakes Mafia tension, and brilliant revenge kept you on the edge of your seat, we need your support. Please hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and drop a comment below telling us your favorite moment. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you